And we're back to the Python Institute, this time lab number 31111. And we are working again with comparison operators, however, more comparison operators than we worked with previously. Previously, we were comparing numbers, whether a number was greater than or equal to, or less than or equal to. And this time we are comparing strings. For instance, is the name Ed the same as the name Edric? Well, no, but they actually both refer to the same person. Yeah. So let's go ahead and look at this lab right here. See, objectives: become familiar with the input function. We're kind of going pretty good with the input. Be familiar with comparison operators and conditional execution. So we get to work with some if-then statements. Awesome. All right, so let's see the scenario. Spathiphyllum, however you say that, more commonly known as the peace lily or the white sail plant, is one of the most popular indoor house plants that filters out harmful toxins from the air. Gotta worry about those toxins. Some of the toxins that it neutralizes include benzene, formaldehyde, and ammonia. Imagine you're a computer program that loves plants. Whoever writes these scenarios. Whenever it receives an input in the form of the word spathiphyllum, it involuntarily shouts out to the console the following string: Spathiphyllum is the best plant ever. Yeah. Write a program that utilizes the concept of conditional execution, takes a string as input, and prints the sequence: yes, Spathiphyllum is the best plant ever, and to the screen if the input is spathiphyllum with the uppercase S. Prints no, I want a big spathiphyllum if the input is spathiphyllum with a lowercase s. And then prints spathiphyllum, not blah, otherwise. So test your code using the data we provided you. Spathiphyllum, pelargian, yeah. Whoever knows these names, good for you. So let's go ahead and let's check this out. So we start off with having to get an input. Well, let's go ahead and start off with an input. See, does it give us a name to name it? No. Okay. In that case, I'll go ahead and name it my input. It's not the best name, but at least it is somewhat descriptive of what we're doing. And we want to get input. We want to prompt out to the end user, what do you have to say? Question mark. So that will print out to the end user, what do you have to say? And then it will save that output, or save whatever's typed in into my input. At this point, we have an if-then statement, and if you didn't necessarily read through all the information prior to this, then if-then statement basically says, hey, if something, then do something. For instance, if it is the morning, then wake up. And it's really just that simple. There are some additions to this. For instance, if I wake up in the middle of the night and it's not the morning, then I can have an else statement. Let's see. Actually, I'll put that down here. Else. And it would be back to sleep. My pen doesn't want to work. There we go. But then there's also situations where, hey, maybe it's not quite the morning, but it's pretty darn close, or it is the morning, but the alarm hasn't gone off yet, in which case I can actually do a combination of those two with an else if. Excuse me. ELIF. An else if statement, and then I can hit snooze. If my pen likes me. There you go. So this is the basic idea of an if-then statement. If something is true, if it is in fact morning, then do something. I then have an else if. So maybe the first situation doesn't quite match true, but the second situation does match true, so do that. Otherwise, if the if statement or the multiple else if statements don't fit, then finally follow this else statement at the very end. You'll get a whole lot more practice with that as you go forward, because if then statements are kind of how computers work. All right, so I get an input called my input, and I say, hey, what do you have to say? And now I want to compare things. I want to say, hey, what does my input equal? And I want to say, do you equal spathiphyllum? Now I have to be a little careful here when I'm comparing strings like this, or when I'm comparing whether something equals spathiphyllum or equals something else. Previously, we used a single equal sign, and I told you that that is an assignment operator. It's not saying my input equals that. It's saying assign the input into my variable. If I want to do a comparison, I actually have to do a double equal sign. And this is very common for people to mess up. In fact, even seasoned engineers will forget the second equal sign, and then they'll be working along and suddenly things won't be working properly, and they'll end up having to go back and they'll be like, oh, that, yeah, I missed that. Very common thing for people to do. Don't worry, it happens to everybody. So what I want to do is I want to compare my input here. So I'm going to start off with an if statement, and I want to say if my input is equal to, and then I'll go ahead and type in, hopefully correctly, spathiphyllum. I think I spelled that correctly. And then for Python here, I have to use a colon to say I want it to run the following code. So if this is correct, or if this is true, then run the following code, and then I hit enter, and you'll notice how my console is already tabbed in. I'm currently typing here as opposed to all the way to the far left. Everything that's indented here will run with this if statement. In fact, only will run if this if statement is correct until I remove my indentation. Hopefully that will make sense in the future. So if the input from the end user is spathiphyllum with the capital S, then I want to print out, according to this, I want to print out the sentence. Yes, spathiphyllum is the best plant ever. And then hit enter, and what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to hit backspace in order for my mouse, or for my cursor, to go all the way to the left hand side. So if spathiphyllum is what's typed in, then this line, only the lines that are indented under this if statement are executed. As soon as I went back to the far end, that line is not going to be executed. That is no longer part of the if statement. However, yeah, sure. Actually, we'll do another if statement. So that was my first if statement. Let's do another one. So my input equal. And the second scenario was when spathiphyllum was the lowest, was lowercase. Spathiphyllum with lowercase, and again with a colon at the end, excuse me. Again, it automatically indents me in. That's really nice of them. And I will go ahead and print. What was it? No, I want a big spathiphyllum. And then backspace again to get out of that if then statement. And then lastly is if something doesn't equal spathiphyllum. So if my input not equal, you know what, we'll worry about that last one here in just a second. So let's go ahead and run this. So I'll run it and it'll say, hey, what do you want to say? And I'll go ahead and type something in, hopefully it's spelled correctly. Oh, actually, I'm seeing right here, I typoed it. So, and I think I just screwed it up. All right, let's go back to this guy. I've never had problems with that editor before, but now it is just plaguing me. All right. Spathiphyllum. All right, and it returns yes. That is the best plant ever. So it took the input, it compared it, and it said, does that equal that? And it said yes. All right, best plant ever. Let's try that one more time, except with lowercase. And it went through, and first off, it compared this one, and it said, no, that is not correct. That is not true. Therefore, I won't do that. But then it looks on line number 5, and it says, yes, that is true, so I will do this, and I will print out the output. However, we still don't have the last scenario, in which case it just kind of ignores those first two. So what we need to do is we need to look at the output and say spathiphyllum, not whatever the input was. Now there's two different ways I can do this. I can continue on with this process, and I could actually say if my input not equal, so exclamation mark equal, to be not equal, and then spathiphyllum and I think that actually needs to be lowercase. My input not equal spathiphyllum. Sure. There we go. Then print. What was it? Spathiphyllum. What was I supposed to print? Spathiphyllum. There we go. Not. And then we'll do a comma and my input. We'll run that. So I'll type in something weird. And it says, no, spathiphyllum, not blah. And so it actually did work properly. Oh, I didn't typo that? I did. Yeah, there we go. So that was one way to do it. And depending on which editor you're in, this may actually work or not. Specifically because of the fact that you may notice right here we have two lines here, whereas here we just have one. These are the indents. The original Python Institute editor put in 2 indents. This editor only put in 1. I probably would want those to be equal. There we go. So this is one way to do it. And again, basically we're going through and we're saying, hey, is this true? If so, do something. It then goes to the next one. It says, is this true? If so, do something. Otherwise, it comes out to here and it says, is this true? And if so, then prints out the last one. That's one possible way to do it. However, we could also speed this up. We could make it so that it's only evaluating as few options as necessary. And with that, we can do, or for that, what we do is we change this if statement, the second if statement, to an else if statement. And what that means is it will start off and we will evaluate this first one. Now, if that is true, so if this is true, if this is matched properly, then this second one is never evaluated. Because it's only if, it's else, else if the first one isn't true. So if the first one is true, the second one is never evaluated. But if it's false, then the second one is in fact evaluated. So it does speed it up a little bit. Beyond that, we know there's only really 3 options. It's either spathiphyllum uppercase, spathiphyllum lowercase, or something else. Well, I don't actually need an if statement there. I could actually just change that to an else. In which case I don't even need that right there. I could just say else. which means it's going to come through and it's going to say true, true, and then otherwise. So if the first one is evaluates as true, then it prints out its output and then quits out of this entire block of code. If the first one is false, but then gets to the second one and the second one is true, then it prints out the second line and then quits out of that block of code. If both the first and the second if statements are false, then and only then does it print this last line of code. And it works exactly the same as before. So now if I go ahead and I type in roses, then it says, no, spathiphyllum, not roses. So it actually does work a little bit more efficiently. Now, when you're only dealing with 3 options here, it's not necessarily that big of a concern. However, this could be helpful when you're dealing with a large number of if-then statements. You can definitely speed up your processing, as well as deal with situations where you have very, very restrictive scenarios or very, very specific scenarios going out to more general scenarios. For instance, your very first if-then statement may only be for men that are 6'4" that are in their 40s and under 200 pounds. It's a very, very specific scenario. Whereas the second scenario may be men who are 6'4" and in their 40s. So the more specific scenario would be caught on the first section, but then the more general scenario would be on the second section. And then you can get more and more general in order to capture more and more options at that point. So there you go. There's your... that is your first introduction to some more comparison operators and the if-then statement.